What if the love of your life became the source of your deepest heartbreak? My name is Henry Hank Collins, a 53-year-old architect, and this is the story of my 25-year marriage to Diane Peterson Collins, a journey that began with a spark in college, blossomed into a family, and ended in betrayal, tragedy, and a lesson I never expected to learn. My name is Henry Collins, but everyone calls me Hank. I'm 53 years old, and for most of my life, I thought I had everything figured out. I grew up in a quiet Midwestern town where life was simple. My dad was a carpenter, a man who built things with his hands and believed in hard work, honesty, and the strength of a good foundation. My mom? She was the heart of our home, always making sure we felt loved. Their marriage was a beacon to me, solid and unwavering. I looked at them and thought, this is what I want someday. And when I met Diane, I believed I'd found that. But life isn't as predictable as a blueprint. Sometimes, the foundation you build your life on can crack without you even realizing it. As I share this story, I want you to know it's not just about betrayal and heartbreak. It's about love, loss, and the lessons you learn along the way. If you've ever wondered how something so perfect can fall apart, stay with me, because I'm still trying to figure it out too. It's funny how a single moment can change your life. For me, that moment happened on a crisp fall evening during my sophomore year of college. I was 20, a lanky architecture major who spent more time hunched over blueprints than socializing. That night, I reluctantly attended a mixer, nudged by my roommate who claimed I needed to get a life. The room was buzzing with laughter and music, but then I saw her, Diane Peterson. She had this effortless glow about her, a kind of confidence that turned heads without even trying. She was wearing a yellow sundress that seemed to capture the light, and when she laughed, it was as if the entire room paused to listen. I worked up the nerve to talk to her, fumbling over some cheesy line about her dress. She smirked, clearly unimpressed, and said, "That's the best you've got?" Her wit was sharp, but her eyes were warm, and before I knew it, we were talking like old friends. Diane was a journalism major, brimming with ambition. She wanted to write stories that changed the world, while I dreamed of designing buildings that would stand the test of time. That night, under a canopy of cheap party lights, we shared our hopes, fears, and 1,000 little details about our lives. I walked her back to her dorm, heart pounding and mind racing. As I stood there, watching her disappear behind the door, I thought, this is it. She's the one. I couldn't have known then how much of my life would revolve around her, for better and eventually for worse. Life doesn't send warnings when it's about to knock the wind out of you. I was 25 when my father passed away unexpectedly. One moment, he was this indestructible man, the rock of our family, and the next, he was gone. A heart attack, they said, quick, sudden, merciless. Losing him was like losing a part of myself. I struggled to find my footing in the aftermath. My mom leaned on me in ways I wasn't prepared for, and I found myself trying to fill shoes that were far too big. Diane, though, was my lifeline. She was there at every turn, steady, compassionate, and always knowing the right thing to say. One quiet evening, sitting on the porch swing at my family home, I asked her to marry me. I didn't have a ring or a plan, but I had her, and that was enough. Diane said yes without hesitation, her eyes filled with tears and something that looked like hope. We married a few months later in a small ceremony. It was simple, just close family and friends, but it felt perfect. We were young, 24 and 22, and full of dreams. I was determined to build a life as solid as the homes I designed. Diane, with her unstoppable drive, had her eyes set on becoming a respected journalist. The future looked bright, and for a while, it truly was. But grief doesn't just vanish. It lingers, shaping you in ways you don't always notice. Looking back, I wonder if losing my father was the first crack in the foundation I worked so hard to build. Our first real test came when we started building our family. Diane and I had always talked about having kids, and when Emily came along, it felt like our dreams were finally taking shape. She was a tiny bundle of energy with Diane's sparkling eyes and my stubborn determination. 3 years later, Mark joined us, completing our little family. Parenthood was a whirlwind. Between sleepless nights, temper tantrums, and school plays, our lives revolved around the kids. I threw myself into my architectural career, working long hours to provide for them. Diane, meanwhile, was climbing the ranks at the regional newspaper. Her byline started appearing on the front page, and her passion for storytelling only seemed to grow. But success comes at a cost, doesn't it? Between work deadlines and parenting duties, Diane and I started losing touch with each other. Our conversations became transactional. Did you pick up the kids? Can you cover this expense? Instead of the heartfelt exchanges we used to have. There were nights when I'd come home late to find Diane already asleep, her laptop still glowing beside her. I'd tell myself it was just a phase, that once the kids were older or work slowed down, we'd find our way back to each other. But life doesn't wait for you to catch up. The cracks were there, small and subtle at first. Missed date nights, forgotten anniversaries, and a growing sense that we were living parallel lives. At the time, I didn't see it for what it was. I was too busy building houses to notice that my own home was starting to fall apart. 25 years. That's what Diane and I were about to celebrate. A quarter century of marriage. It felt like a milestone that deserved something special, something to remind us of how far we'd come. I spent weeks planning it out. I made reservations at the restaurant where we had our first anniversary dinner, a cozy little spot overlooking the lake. I even wrote her a letter, an honest, heartfelt reflection of our life together, a reminder of the love we'd built and the challenges we'd overcome. But something felt off in the days leading up to our big night. Diane seemed distant, distracted. I chalked it up to her work at the paper. She'd been taking on more projects than ever. She'll snap out of it, I told myself. She's just stressed. The evening of our anniversary came, and I was ready, dressed in my best suit, the letter tucked into my pocket, and flowers waiting on the passenger seat of my car. But then my phone buzzed. It was Diane. "I'm sorry, Hank. I can't make it tonight. Something came up at work," she said, her voice hurried and apologetic. I sat there, stunned, staring at the phone long after the call ended. Work? On our 25th anniversary? My gut twisted, a strange mix of anger, disappointment, and something I couldn't quite name. I tried to shake it off, telling myself not to overthink. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted, one that would grow into something much darker in the days to come. I didn't go home right away that night. Instead, I sat in the restaurant parking lot, watching happy couples walk in and out, their laughter spilling into the night air. My mind raced with questions. Why had Diane missed this? What could possibly be more important than us? When I finally did go home, the house was quiet. Diane's car was in the driveway, but the lights were off. I walked in expecting to find her asleep, but instead, I found her sitting in the living room, her laptop open and her face illuminated by the screen. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "How was work?" She looked up, startled, and for a moment I saw something in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or fear. "It was fine," she said quickly, closing the laptop. Too quickly. The unease that had been brewing inside me for weeks finally bubbled over. Later that night, while she was in the shower, I saw her phone on the counter, unlocked. I hesitated, telling myself I shouldn't invade her privacy. But curiosity, or maybe desperation, got the better of me. What I found stopped me cold. Messages from Marty, my friend. The words were playful at first, then intimate, and finally unmistakably romantic. My chest tightened and my hands shook as I scrolled through them. Diane's laughter from the bathroom echoed down the hall, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. In that moment, everything I thought I knew about my wife, my marriage, my life, came crashing down. And the worst part, I had no idea how to confront her about it. Not yet. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every message I read replayed in my mind like a broken record. Marty, my friend, the man who'd shared countless beers and stories with me, had betrayed me in a way I never thought possible. And Diane, my wife of 25 years, had been complicit. The next morning, I went about my routine as if nothing had changed, but inside, I was boiling over. I watched Diane over breakfast, studying her every movement, every word. She was cheerful, humming softly as she buttered her toast, completely unaware of the storm brewing within me. I couldn't hold it in much longer. That evening, after the kids were asleep, I confronted her. "Diane, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady but strained. She looked at me, confused at first, then wary. "I know about Marty," I said, cutting straight to the point. Her face went pale, and for a moment she didn't speak. Then came the denial, the excuses, the deflections. But I had the proof, and when I showed her the messages, she broke down. Tears streamed down her face as she begged for forgiveness, claiming it had been a mistake, a moment of weakness. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to hold on to the image of the woman I'd loved for so long. But the betrayal cut too deep. "How long, Diane?" I asked, my voice shaking. "A few months," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Hearing those words felt like a knife to the heart. The trust we'd built over decades was shattered in an instant. That night, I slept on the couch, staring at the ceiling and wondering if we could ever come back from this. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Diane and I tried to talk, but every conversation ended in anger or tears. She insisted she wanted to work things out, that she still loved me, but how could I trust her? How could I look at her without seeing Marty's name on those messages? I started spending more time at work, avoiding the house and the pain that waited for me there. Diane, too, seemed to retreat into herself. The kids noticed, of course. Emily and Mark weren't little anymore. At 18 and 15, they understood that something was wrong. But how do you explain to your children that their mother betrayed their father? That their family was breaking apart? One evening, Diane and I sat at the kitchen table, the weight of our silence filling the room. "Hank," she said finally, her voice trembling, "maybe we need some space. Maybe we should—" "Get a divorce," I finished for her. She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. In that moment, I felt a strange mix of relief and heartbreak. I didn't want our marriage to end, but I couldn't see a way forward. We agreed to separate, and within weeks, Diane had filed for divorce. The process was excruciating. Dividing assets, deciding on custody arrangements for the kids, facing the reality of life without her. But the hardest part was seeing her move on so quickly. Barely a month after our divorce was finalized, she married Marty. It felt like a final slap in the face, a confirmation that everything we'd built together had been replaced, discarded. I threw myself into work, trying to rebuild my life one day at a time. But deep down, I knew the pain would linger for a long time. Life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Just as I was starting to adjust to my new normal, I received a phone call that shattered everything all over again. It was late on a Wednesday night when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. The voice on the other end was shaky, hesitant. It was Emily. "Dad," she said, her voice breaking. "Mom's gone." For a moment, I didn't understand. "What do you mean, gone?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. Emily explained through sobs. Diane was dead, killed by Marty in what the police were calling a domestic dispute turned violent. Marty had been arrested, but that offered little comfort. The man I once called a friend, who had already destroyed my marriage, had now taken the life of the woman I had loved for over half my life. The news hit me like a freight train. Despite everything Diane had done, despite the betrayal and the pain, I had never wished harm upon her. She was the mother of my children, my partner in raising them, and someone who had once been my entire world. I spent the next few days in a fog, helping Emily and Mark make arrangements for the funeral. The hardest part was seeing them grieve, their young faces etched with pain and confusion. They'd already lost their family as they knew it, and now they had lost their mother entirely. At the funeral, I stood by the casket, my emotions a tangled mess of sorrow, anger, and regret. I thought about the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago, the life we had built together, and the way it had all unraveled. Diane's death marked the end of an era, one filled with both joy and heartbreak. After Diane's funeral, the house felt emptier than ever. The kids returned to their routines, but I could see the weight they carried. As for me, I buried myself in work during the day and faced my demons at night. I kept replaying the events in my mind. Was there something I could have done differently? Could I have saved Diane from the path that led her to Marty? The questions haunted me, but the answers never came. Over time, I realized that holding on to anger and regret wasn't helping anyone, especially not Emily and Mark. They needed me to be present, to be their anchor. Slowly, I began to focus on what mattered, supporting my kids, rebuilding my own life, and finding a way to honor Diane's memory despite everything. Forgiveness wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. But as the months turned into years, I learned to let go of the bitterness. Diane had made mistakes, as had I. In the end, I chose to remember the good times, the laughter, the shared dreams, and the love that had once been so strong. Today, I stand here not as a man defined by betrayal or tragedy, but as someone who has lived, loved, and learned. Life doesn't come with guarantees, and it certainly doesn't follow a blueprint. But even through the pain, there is growth, and even through the loss, there is hope. Thank you for watching and allowing me to share my story. If this resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. And remember, life is fragile, but love, no matter how complicated, leaves an indelible mark. Take care of the people you hold dear.